All right, so we're in this series, Unhurried, and the first week, Rondi brought us into the conversation around hurry sickness. Do you guys remember that? And what does it mean to be sick with hurry? And he illuminated a lot of that in our own culture and how we suffer from that. Last week, I talked about the practice of Sabbath as a spiritual discipline, where we experience the now and the not yet of eternity. We practice our eternity with God even now. We slow down to live at the pace of Jesus. We learn from Adam and from the story in Genesis that God created humanity first and primarily to rest and to delight with Him. And Jesus says this in Mark 2. He says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, this is a gift to humanity, something for our benefit, something for us to become more like Jesus because of. And when we live outside of that identity, when we live outside of that gift, when we live outside of that pace that Jesus lived at, we miss the rest of God. But when we live in that, we live actually into the pattern of creation as it was designed to be. We get something special from God, and we're going to talk about that today. We also recognize, though, that we live in a fallen world, right? And our world has been made crooked by our own controls, our own desire to define what is good and bad. And so Jesus comes to teach us explicitly through the Gospels, but also implicitly through what we witness in His life, how to live in a right way, how to live in the kingdom of heaven, even on earth. Slowing down to unhurry our lives is a means to an end. And the end is to be more with God, to rest in God, to be empowered by God's Spirit, to make time to delight and find our identity in God, so that we can give more of Him away, because you cannot give what you do not have, right? And so we need to stop, to delight, to contemplate, to rest in Jesus regularly, to receive that life that is truly life so that we can give it away to Him. But this is hard, and it's always been hard. Yeah. And it was hard for the people even in the Old Testament. It was hard for the Israelites to do this. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of this idea of a counter-liturgy. And that liturgy is kind of church world language. It's a way of worshiping, right? A way in which we worship. So we have a worship service every Sunday, and it has a liturgy to it. We sing, we take communion, and it creates a pace of worship for us, right? The world has a liturgy to it. It's shaping a way of worshiping, a way of being human. And we are looking to Jesus to offer us a counter liturgy. But this is difficult. In Ezekiel chapter 20, the author writes this. He says, and he's talking about this history of the challenge of resting and finding their rest in God, about the Israelites. In verse 15, he says, also with uplifted hand, I swore to them in the wilderness that I would not bring them into the land that I had given them, a land flowing with milk and honey. Doesn't that sound good? The most beautiful of all lands, because they rejected my laws and did not follow my decrees and desecrated my Sabbath. This is the story that the author of Hebrews picks up, even for us as New Testament Christians, as we try to fight to find our identity in the rest of Jesus, to be formed by what He had to offer, the rest for your souls, as he says. And in Hebrews, in chapter 3, the author writes this. He says, and to whom did God swear that they would never enter His rest, if not those who disobeyed? So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. If you know the story that both of these authors are talking about, it's the story of God setting up a pattern to life for His people, and His people not trusting Him with that pattern, and wanting to do more, and having this kind of scarcity mentality that there's just not enough in the way that God gives us a pattern to life. And so there's this lack of trust in God that equates to a lack of experienced rest with God. They missed out. Are you with me right there?
Yeah, and what's so sad about this is that it's not a condition that is just for the Israelites, right? It's something that we all experience. It's a human condition. And many of us, we resist and we miss out on God's design for work and rest. And if and when we finally realize it, it's usually way too late. This nurse, Bronnie Ware, she's an Australian nurse, and she spent years of her life working with people in their last weeks of life. And she wrote down epiphanies that they had, and she put it together in this book called The Top 5 Regrets of Dying. Here are the top 2. Number 1 was that they had wished that they'd lived their life with more courage to live their life and not live the life that everyone expected them to live. And number 2 was they wished they hadn't worked so hard. They regretted missing time with their children and their youth, or spending time with their spouse, because they were caught up on that treadmill of working and working to exist. And I know, saying this, I believe that you guys agree, and logically this makes sense. Like, you guys know this. We hear this over and over. But I would also bet that the idea of instituting rest seems impossible, or like at the very, very least impractical, right? And I think that makes sense. It's challenging. When we first started it, I think we had those same feelings and thoughts. And anytime we've shared the idea of Sabbathing to a new group, we've heard the same things. And even now, we've had conversations with many of you who have shared, like, this sounds really challenging. Like, how do I do that? And it makes sense. There's a lot of legitimate questions, like, how is this practical in my life stage? I work 3 jobs, I go to school full time, I'm a single mom. I've got a bunch of kids at home, they're all in diapers, and I work at night. Like, we all have different challenges, and it could just seem that this won't fit. How do we even implement this practically? Like, what do I do? What's step 1? I pick a day, I stare at a wall, like, is that how I rest, right? There's a lot of questions. Is this sustainable? Can I keep this rhythm in my life? So many things I've started and haven't finished. Like, will this be sustainable for me? Do I implement this now, even though I feel like I'm okay, just out of the wisdom of following an example that Jesus did? Or do I wait until I've burnt out and had a mental breakdown? Like, does it matter? How do we even create this culture of rest? And can we sustain it as a community? All these questions, I think, are legitimate. And I just want to encourage you to take heart that Sabbath is a practice. So that means that it's something that we have to practice doing. And like anything that we take on new, it always gets harder, right, before it takes off, before we have success in it. When Elias first introduced the concept of Sabbath to me, I had 4 babies under the age of 4. I was nursing Jude. We had just planted a church. We were leading singles congregationally. I think we had just finished putting on the singles conference in Phoenix. We were a little bit busy. And I was really faithless. Like, I don't think that this is going to work for me. Sorry. Like, maybe there's things that you can stop doing, but most of my life I can't stop doing, you know, like, how will I rest? And I was a little bit angry and resentful when I would see Elias try to implement it, because we were disunified in it, right? I didn't believe that I could rest. And so when I'd see him rest, I'd be like, yeah.
I didn't do a great job on the rollout with that one, that's for sure. Yeah.
We just weren't on the same page,
Yeah.
right? When husband and wives aren't on the same page, it never goes well.
Yeah.
But then I read this book. Elias recommended this book, and I started reading, and I started studying out Sabbath for myself, and I started to kind of like buy into it. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll try it. This makes sense. It's a gift. Jesus is trying to give me something. Okay, I'm going to take it. And I like fumbled through it a lot because I didn't know how to do it. It was like, well, can I do this? Is this okay to do on the Sabbath? Am I allowed to do that? It's like all I knew was rules. Right. And I just wanted to find more rules to figure out how to do Sabbath. And Sabbath isn't about rules. It's not. It's about finding a rule of life, which, if you remember, Elias talked a little bit about that. But Sabbath, interestingly, is described sometimes as an act of resistance, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's resisting that hurry culture that we're in, the consumerism, and it's resting from the formation of the world. And it's also, it exposes the resistance in us. It really does. Because slowing down and being still, it's really going against the grain, right, of culture, of how we've been formed. laundry actually illuminated this for me. I know, laundry. I actually like doing laundry, and I have a lot of laundry all week long. But I've always really liked it. It was, to me, kind of like a little mini vacation in the middle of my busy, busy life or my busy day. It was like my alone time. Nobody would bother me if I was doing laundry. So it seemed like a really peaceful place for me, and I imagined, well, I could take this into Sabbath with me because it's always been a restful place. But as I learned to experience rest in Jesus and the things that he's given me, like delighting in my children and not having to really do anything, I realized, I don't need to do anything to find that rest. Does that make sense? Like, it started to unravel this practice that I had of escapism. Right. Like, I had found doing something helped me escape what seemed like, and it seemed like rest, and it wasn't. And as soon as I learned how to get rest from God, I was like, I don't need to do this. And I remember throwing all my laundry off my bed. It was amazing.
Yeah, liturgies, again, they are how we worship, right? They shape us into a particular type of people. And so the question we're wrestling with is, are we, over time, over the course of our life, over the course of our congregational life, are we becoming more the type of people who find their rest in God, who find their identity in God's love, who can slow down and not be in control and be at the pace of Jesus and feel great about it? Or are we being deceived? Are we getting our identity, our security, our peace, our joy, our satisfaction from somewhere else? That's the tension, right? And if we are running the risk that the author of Hebrews was trying to warn his audience. There is a temptation for all of us to believe that in turning our attention away from the living God, in making more time to accomplish and to do and to fill our agendas, that somehow we will find rest and satisfaction. And you and I all feel that tension, right? We turn towards our careers, towards the curating of our children's lives and their sports and their educational lives and their social status and all those things. And we turn towards attaining more pleasure and experiences. And we kind of turn really ultimately towards expansion of our own little kingdom. But ironically enough, we come up wanting. Yep. Right. We come up unsatisfied. Yeah. We come into Sunday morning tired, thirsty, maybe a little beat up. We cram it in 7 days a week, and yet it's not doing the trick, right? Work, entertainment, distractions, striving. You can do all of that and still make it to church, still be a part of a small group, still take communion on Sunday, right? But not be experiencing the life that Jesus has come to offer. And so we need to learn to slow down. The author of Hebrews goes on in chapter 4, still talking about the same theme. This is a great haul of scripture for you to study out this week. He says, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them, because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed it. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. This is New Testament. Let us make every effort to enter that rest. In other words, to curate our lives, the rhythm, the habits, the practices of our lives around a deeply rooted obedience to God, to finding our identity, to centralizing who we are, our schedules, our finances, our relationships around the way that God has called us to be. To see him as the one who truly satisfies. We've been talking about this discipline of Sabbath, and taking a weekly kind of stop to just rest and delight and contemplate and be with God. And it is a spiritual discipline, as Rachel talked about. It's something that you have to practice and work at. And it is a time when we willingly surrender. We give up our energies, our agendas, our bodies, and we trust in God. And we trust in His control over time. That we are not what we produce. We are who we belong to. And if we're willing to practice that, and practice so many other things that Jesus comes to teach us, right? We can begin to readjust the thirst, the desires of our hearts. That we no longer thirst after the things that only satisfy temporarily. But we begin to curate a lifestyle that shapes our hearts and the direction of our hearts to find satisfaction in that which truly satisfies. Are you with me right there? And so this is a discipline. It's just like your prayer life. It doesn't save you, right? We're not talking about any kind of law here, but we're talking about a gift that Jesus practiced, that He calls us to follow Him and to learn from Him how to rest, to learn from Him how to find our identity in Him. And God, we learn to find that God loves us more than what we produce. He loves who we are. And He loves us so much that He would give us right limitations. You are not created to live on, working, producing 24/7. Not even God did that. There were right limitations to the way of Jesus. And we don't like that because in our culture, freedom means removal of all limitations. Give me no boundaries, and that's how I get freedom. And Jesus comes and says, actually, follow me, yoke up with me, let me teach you the right pace of life, the right kind of limitations about all things, and you will find freedom. Right?
Yep. Yeah. So Pete Scazzaro, he's a minister at NYC. Many of you probably have heard of him, read his books. For many, many years, he's been writing a series and books on discipleship and emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy church. Okay. Anyways, he wrote 10 reasons why we should Sabbath, which I think are pretty good. Number 1, it was something that God did. Like, maybe that should be enough, right? Jesus practiced it, and those of us created in His image, like, maybe we should as well. 2, Sabbath was built in the DNA of creation. So everything, if you look at nature, has a rhythm. Yep. It stops, it dies, it comes back. Farmers let their land rest so that it could produce better. 3, God created Sabbath as holy. And I think you preached about this one Sunday. Anyways, that day was holy. It was a holy day of rest. 4, it helps us embrace our limits. I think it is really good. God is running the universe. We're not, right? We're not the ultimate person in charge. It'll go on, sadly, without me. And then I love this one, number 5. It protects us from doing violence to ourselves, like our body and our emotions, our mind. If you have kids, do you know how poorly they do when they lack sleep and rest? So do we. Yeah. Right? Nobody does well that way. We're not meant to go on 24/7. We'll burn out. 6, it reminds us that God's world is good and that there's enough that He'll provide, and it's a little preview of what's to come when all work will stop. Yes. 7, it defeats the powers that define people by what they do. Right? Instead of like, you are the job and you are the work. No, there's something more to us. And it kind of puts an end to that. It helps put an end to that. 8, Sabbath offers a lived experience in God's love because it's meant to take away distractions, things that are like vying for your attention, idols, right? Idol temptations, so that you can really focus on God. 9, it breaks the addiction to the doing and the making and the producing and accomplishing that is so much of our culture. And then finally, it points us to Jesus, right? Like, why take a day off to spend it with Jesus? Well, spend it with Jesus and find out, right? Like it's an experience that'll keep giving to you.
That's good. So Jesus comes. He offers us a counter liturgy to the world. He lives in a relationship with God that brings trust and rest. And he says, hey, come yoke up with me. Let me teach you how to live at that pace of life. Not rushed, not hurried, not anxious, no longer competing, but practicing peace, patience, being with the one who made you, living the good life. So if you want to begin to try that, to practice that, to engage in this counter liturgy, there's really 4 things that you're looking for on a Sabbath. One, you want it to be something that it's a space where you stop. You stop all paid and unpaid work. So, like for us, we empty the dishwasher the day before Sabbath. We don't want to clean dishes, right? We don't want to unload or load. We vacuum the house. We get the house all set up, all done. I take out the trash. We do all the stuff so that for a period of time we can rest, not just from our paid work, but from our unpaid work.
That came after weeks and weeks.
That took some time to learn. You stop all work. Then you rest. You do what brings you deep, satisfying rest. You sleep in. You exercise a little bit maybe, you eat well, you take a walk, you have a meal with a friend. You delight. Third, you delight. So you stop, rest, and you delight. You enjoy what she talked about. You enjoy all that God has already done, just like he stopped and enjoyed all that he had already done. You take longer times to pray, longer times to read Scripture and to study and to meditate, to sing songs and to worship God, to enjoy your spouse and your family, your backyard, your garden, your whatever, your home. You delight in all the good that God has given you. And then 4, you contemplate. So stop, rest, delight, and contemplate. This is a time of bringing your attention to God. This is not a day off. This is not just a time to do errands. This is not a time to just check out. This is not a time to just, to take naps all day and forget about the world. This is a time to intentionally contemplate God's eternity, that you are in relationship with the one who created you, to dwell in that space for 24 hours. Does that make sense? So, in a very practical way, choose a 7-day rhythm for you that will work for this. Now, everybody's got different situations, like Rachel said. You may not be able to start off with 24 hours, but maybe you can start off with 8 or 12 and work your way towards that 24-hour space. Sundays, for many of us, would be a great option because worship's already built in, right? And you take the day to rest and delight in God and to be with the fellowship. Or others, it may be a different day. But Jesus makes it clear in his teachings. Again, and I just want to overemphasize, Sabbath is designed for you. Like this is a gift for you so that you can live out your design, so that you can live at rest. This is not something that you do to justify yourself before God. You could not practice Sabbath, and I think you'll still go to heaven. Okay? But you may go there, a little more tired. A little less familiar with the rest that you're about to experience for eternity.
You might experience a little less heaven here on earth.
A little less
too.
heaven here on earth. And I think when speaking about salvation, if we're talking about it more than just a membership card to heaven someday, but we're talking about it from liberation, which is the language that the Bible uses, salvation. If we're talking about liberating our bodies and our minds, maybe Sabbath has some salvation for us even to experience here in this life. But Jesus offers you this and invites you to it. You are not made to work 24/7. You are made to work 6 days a week. So this is not an invitation to be lazy either. But this is an invitation to rest, to delight, to have a full stop, to worship, to contemplate, to be with God. So let's be shaped, amen? By this practice of Jesus, by this liturgy of Jesus. It's a counter liturgy to the world's formation. And yet we trust, we anchor our hope in that Jesus came to offer us life to the full. And that didn't mean necessarily a full schedule. but it's still life to the full. Amen? All right, so we're going to open it up for a little Q&A, a little time to just to talk about this. And we won't have a ton of time, but we got about maybe 10 minutes or so. We'll try to do our best to unpack anything. And please know that anything's on the table, our personal lives, our story, how we practice this, theological questions, etc. And we'll do our best to try to get to those. Yeah, Al, so we got a microphone coming around before you start asking.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So hospitality is work,
Uh-huh.
and yet spending time with friends and loved ones is important and could be part of Sabbath as well. So how do you jive those?
Really good. Well, two things. One, Sabbath is a communal experience. So look, all the introverts in the room, you may need to find rest by being alone for a period of time on a weekly basis. And that's good, and that's okay, right? But often, for us, for Sabbath, we'll have people over our home for dinner. So we'll cook a big meal on Friday night, and we'll invite people to come break bread and to have that kind of inaugural meal with us. We have times with people, friends, that we see that pop in on us. We had some friends pop in on us yesterday during our day of rest that just came and visited with us for 2-3 hours. So it is not a time to hide away, to squirrel away from the world and people, right? Because we are the image bearers of God and we find that in community, right? But you're going to have to figure out where the balance of that is, right? Do you pack your schedule? That's probably not going to feel like rest for you and your spouse, maybe. Maybe your spouse runs a different way than you do. You're going to have to wrestle with some of that stuff. I can say for Rachel, she cooks most of the meals throughout the week. On Saturday, I typically just take over food duties because the kids got to eat, we got to eat. She does a great job of cooking a big meal on Friday so that we just we keep feasting on that throughout the day the next day. But I get up, I make the kids breakfast. This week I made them pancakes and extra syrup, and they all come into the kitchen. The ways of God are sweet. The ways of God are sweet because we've trained them, right? I train them on Sabbath morning. I give them something sweet, and I ask them, why do I give you something sweet? And they say, because the ways of God are sweet. Because I want them to know, man, the way of living in the way of Jesus, it's good. This is a good way, right? So they all got breakfast that morning. So there's still work to be done. There's still things that you have to get to. But as best you can, I think you're trying to remove the have-tos. Does that make sense? Yep. So hope that helps. Yeah, Jen, right next to him. All right, Jen, got a duo question.
So many questions. Sorry. There is a paradox in what you're talking about. There's a tension between discipline and labor. Mm-hmm. So I do have so many questions, but I'm going to stick on this one, which came up earlier in what you were talking about, and specifically in relation to Hebrews 3, that scripture. What does it mean to disobey rest?
Really good. Do you want to take that one?
You may not have an answer. That's okay.
Yeah, no. So a lot of the discipline, think about it like, I'm not a big weightlifter or anything, but I think we all are familiar with weightlifting people, yeah? You go and you lift weights, right? That's the practicality of it. And then as you get into the practice of it, you start to learn little nuances about what I should eat, or how much water I should drink, or how many hours I need to sleep to regenerate my muscles. I might be making this stuff up. But do you know what I mean? I should stretch too, maybe, so I don't get too bulky. And then you start to get into this rhythm of what's producing what you're expecting it to produce. And then one day you have a cheeseburger. And you realize, that was a little bit anti my practice of lifting, or I don't know. Maybe that's a really bad example, but you
feel the difference. Though.
You feel it, and then you feel it. Or you're like, oh, that didn't sit well, and that just put me back. Mm-hmm. That messed up this week for me, my gains or losses, whatever. So I think in the same way, the discipline of Sabbath, there's all these nuances, and they're particular to you and the way that God made you and the way that you function and your needs. And you'll feel the Spirit guiding you. You will as you practice it. And you'll know, like, that wasn't, like, I would go online and I would, like, window shop for all the things that I would want. And I just put them in my cart. I knew I wasn't going to buy, like, 95% of it. But
Maybe 98% of it. Yeah.
But it's not true. 73. But I thought that was restful. I did, right? But there was something in me that was like, this isn't producing anything except for the desire to want more or to be dissatisfied. And then I would get to like 6 p.m. and I'd be kind of like funky or sore and just wasn't rested in my spirit. And so in that way, I was being disobedient. I was disobeying that invitation or that space to really rest and center myself on God.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I'll say this, we've been at this for about 6 years now. And it's a practice. And what she talked about, that it gets harder before it gets better. Like, there have been many Sabbaths where we've come out of it fighting. You know what I mean?
Tired.
And tired.
Not rested.
Especially early on, because we're trying to figure out how to do this with kids and together, and her approach and my approach, and what's, where's rest lie, and how do, and it's taken years, and it's still evolving, but we're definitely in a way better place now. But it's a practice. It takes time to find that balance, to find some of that rest. So Tom, and then Zoe.
Well, the idea of contemplation sounds kind of theoretical and ethereal. I'm a visual and auditory person,
yeah.
So what does that mean to really do that? And what are some practices we can do to really contemplate God? Because that doesn't really mean anything to me. I don't understand what even you're saying there.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So a couple things. The idea of contemplation is just to give your attention, right? So one way of thinking about worship is you worship whatever you pay attention to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
You worship whatever you pay attention to. So on Sabbath, you intentionally pay attention to God. So I have different books I read, the meditation literature.
Meditation music in the house.
I put on music in the house, worship music. We watch The Chosen on Sabbath. Like, we intentionally we're going to give our attention to God today. This is why it's a discipline. It's not just a day off to take a nap and forget the world. It is a day to intentionally delight and contemplate and find your rest in God. The things of God. Does that help? Yeah. So that may look differently for everybody. Yeah, Zoe and...
Yay. I'm so glad that we were talking about this. So a question I've been thinking about for a while about Sabbath is, I feel like for the first, however long I've been a disciple, 8 years of my spiritual life, I've been trained to take very seriously the urgency of God's mission, that we're supposed to be seeking and saving the lost and making disciples and taking care of the alien, orphan, and widow, and that there's so much work that God really cares about and really wants us to be striving towards. And so I feel also a tension between why does God want us to do all this stuff and rest? How do I do what he wants me to do if he wants both of those things? So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so one kind of rule of thumb is you cannot give away what you do not have. And if you are running it 24/7 and you're filling every inch of your schedule, there's no way that you're filling up with God. You will be able to disciple and teach people rationally what it means to follow God. Like, you can walk them through a series of scriptures and teach them how to agree with certain things and even change some aspects of their life. But you will not be able to give away who you are and train them in the way of Jesus, which Jesus was full. His mission, he had space. He had space to be interrupted. He had space for his schedule to change. He had space to give. Now, I think that's one thing. The second thing is this, is that Jesus is really clear about this throughout the Gospels. In fact, this is what Jesus does 7 times throughout the Gospels on Sabbath, is he heals people. And Sabbath had become such a rigid, in or out justification kind of practice for the Israelites. And he comes and says, just like I've said, about the law, you've heard it was said, but I tell you, right? You've heard it was said, don't murder your brother, or don't murder, right? But I'm telling you, don't even be angry. He says, I'm also Lord of the Sabbath. Let me help you understand what this is about. And then he goes, it's right to do good on the Sabbath. Right. So again, Sabbath is not this selfish thing, right? I'm a part of a board, a European missions board, and I spent 4 hours on a Zoom call on my Sabbath this week. That Zoom call happens 3 times a year. It's not my regular practice, right? It is not restful for me. But sometimes your donkey falls in a pit, right? And you got to pull that donkey out on Sabbath. Sometimes, I've had situations. Look, I had a situation one time. There was a guy who was studying the Bible, and friends of mine, they go, hey, he's ready to count the cost and get baptized. And I know it's your Sabbath, but I'm coming over to pick you up. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's still right to do good.
Right, true, right.
Like, and in fact, intentionally resting should give you more space to be interrupted and participate. I don't schedule hardly anything on my Sabbath. Does that make sense? Unless it's intentional, relational, delight, fun, that kind of stuff. I really don't. But man, sometimes your donkey falls in a pit. Sometimes, somebody needs healing. It's still right to do good.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah, I share something about that.
Yeah. One of the benefits of the discipline of Sabbath is that it reorients the rest of your week, and you have to be way more intentional.
That's right.
In your life. So it makes you more disciplined 6 days out of the week, because you know that on that day you're not going to work. You know that on that day you're going to intentionally focus on and delight in God. And so what it's done over the last 6 years is it's produced, I don't like to super prepare ahead. I like to fly by the seat of my pants. But this has really helped me mature in you're a mom of 4 donkeys that often fall in a hole. There's a lot going on in your life. If nothing's defrosted on Saturday, that's not going to be restful. You know what I mean? So it's helped me to learn how to prepare. Yeah. It's helped me to learn to be disciplined 6 days of the week and get what I really intentionally want to get done. So if I want to be in Jesus' mission, then I need to be intentional about how I'm going to see to that 6 days of the week, because my day of rest is coming on the 7th.
Yeah, I get more done, believe it or not. Taking a full day of rest, I get way more done 6 days a week. I have more to give. I have more to pour out, spiritually and physically. I get more done. So one last question, then we're going to sing a song here before we close. Yeah, Cody.
So one of you had mentioned during the service that we are not what we produce. And it jogged my memory to think about, you can tell a tree by its fruit, and a tree, produces fruit. And I've heard a lot of people teach, you're not studying the Bible with someone right now, or you're not in studies, that's part of discipleship, are you being a disciple? So it's kind of just, confusing, similar to Zoe's, point, we're supposed to be resting, and we should include that in our schedule, but we're also supposed to be, going out and sharing our faith, and that's, huge for campus, we're really, pressed to do that, and so it can feel confusing, and there's a lot of tension there. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts about that.
Yeah.
I love these questions because I feel and I'm not picking on you, Cody, but I just feel it exposes Jesus is rest, and we're no, I want you to rest. I can't. I got to work for you. And I share that, not making fun. That's what I felt too. And it's it's so interesting. But I would start by asking, do I really share my faith every single day? Or
am I in a Bible study every single day?
Am I in a Bible study every single day? Really? Maybe you are.
No.
Okay. So if
Are
the answer,
any of us?
Right. So if the answer is no, then why can't we let go of that have to on a day that God's offering to replenish us so that we can do those things. That's one. And then we're not what we produce. A good tree is known by its fruit. The fruits of the Spirit are our character, are the things that we produce
We can give
in who
away.
we are.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't say the fruits of the Spirit are you're the greatest lawyer that's ever lived. You've like ended world hunger. No, it doesn't say those things, right? It says that you have peace and self-control, and that you're kind and you're loving. If we're running 24/7, even if you've baptized 15 people in the last semester, my guess is that you're not going to be the most like temperate, loving, self-controlled, generous brother. I'm not, and I'm not saying you. It's general, right? So, I think first, we really need to wrestle. Like, why, if God's given us this gift, are we so resistant to it? He's not even telling us to go do something extra, and we're like, but I have to please you, and He's like, just lay down, like stop. I just think that's so interesting. It baffles me how we're like that.
Great question.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's a tension for all of us. I think the other thing I'll just say is we create these dichotomies in our minds all the time. It's either this or it's that. And I think we have to wrestle with that, right? That God's not a tyrant. If you can't live with nuance, if you can't grow in maturity and the nuance and the complexity and the broader, expansive, spectrum of what God's up to, then you treat God like a tyrant. Like He's giving you rules, and I have to either do this or do that.
Right.
Does that make sense? And Jesus seemed to just push off all of that constantly. And so we're learning how to become more like Him in that way. And that's a wrestling match. But I think you'll find the answer and tell all of us once you start practicing and wrestling with this. I think you'll discover more. And that's the idea, right? We don't have all the answers, but we've learned a lot over 6 years of trying to create a weekly rhythm of rest. So
I haven't heard from any moms.
we
I know we're ending.
We're going to keep this conversation open. Please come talk to us afterwards or throughout the week. Look, I get that this is just a first pass at this conversation, right? We're going to keep it in the water supply. We'll bring it back up again next year. We'll keep talking about rest because I'm sure many of us will be burnt out next year somewhere along the way. So, love you guys. Let's stand. We'll sing one more song together.